Pastor Adebayo's finger shook as he pointed at the young woman standing at the front of the church. Bisi's eyes were filled with tears. Her little boy held tightly to her wrapper. "Pastor, please," she whispered. "This woman has brought shame into this congregation." But Pastor Adebayo raised his voice. "Look at her. She had a child outside marriage and still has the courage to stand before God's people." The congregation erupted in whispers. Bisi lowered her head. Then, from the back of the church, an old woman slowly stood. "Then tell us something, Pastor." The entire church became quiet. Mama Comfort pointed at the little boy. "Why does that child have your face?" Pastor Adebayo froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. Then the little boy looked up at him with innocent eyes. "Pastor, why do you look like me?" Nobody in that church knew that Pastor Adebayo had spent years paying one woman to keep his darkest secret. And nobody knew that the little boy standing beside Bisi was his son. Before I tell you how this secret began, subscribe now, because what happened inside this church that Sunday would destroy a marriage, a ministry, and the reputation of a man everyone believed was righteous. 6 years ago, Pastor Adebayo was one of the most respected men in Ijebu-Ode. His church was always full. People traveled from nearby towns just to hear him preach. He spoke loudly against dishonesty. He spoke against adultery. And whenever a woman had a child outside marriage, he was quick to tell the congregation that such women had brought shame upon themselves. His wife, Mama Folake, stood proudly beside him. She was known as a patient and gentle woman. But 6 years ago, their marriage had gone through a painful season after they lost their first child. Folake was grieving. Adebayo was grieving too. And during that dark period, a young woman named Bisi walked around the church, cleaning the offices and helping with small chores. Bisi was poor, but she was kind. When Adebayo stayed late at the church, she sometimes brought him food. When he looked broken, she encouraged him. And one night, while both of them were overwhelmed by grief and loneliness, they crossed a line they should never have crossed. It happened only once, but once was enough. A few weeks later, Bisi discovered she was pregnant. Terrified, she went to Pastor Adebayo. "Pastor, please," she cried. Adebayo stared at her stomach. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then fear took over his face. "Bisi," he whispered, "you cannot tell anyone." She stared at him. "What? If people find out this child is mine, everything will be destroyed. My marriage, my church, my name." Bisi's eyes filled with tears. "And what about me?" "I will help you," he promised quickly. "I'll send money. I'll make sure you and the child are okay. But nobody can know." Bisi wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Folake. She wanted to expose him. But she was alone, pregnant, poor, and terrified of what the entire community would say. So she agreed. She left the church and rented a tiny room at the edge of town. A few months later, she gave birth to a boy. She named him Damilare. Adebayo never came openly. He sent money through a man he trusted. Sometimes Bisi received enough. Sometimes she received almost nothing. But whenever she complained, Adebayo gave the same warning: "Remember our agreement." And Bisi remembered. Years passed. Damilare grew into a gentle, clever little boy. But there was one question he asked his mother again and again. "Mama, where is my father?" Bisi always looked away. "One day, my son." "Does he know me?" Bisi swallowed hard. "Yes." "Does he love me?" That question always broke her heart. "I don't know," she would whisper. Damilare had Adebayo's crooked smile. He had the same habit of tilting his head when he was confused, and he even laughed the same way. But Bisi prayed that nobody would notice. Unfortunately, someone did. Mama Comfort had been attending Adebayo's church longer than almost anyone. She had watched Damilare grow. At first, she thought the resemblance was nothing. Then one Sunday, she saw Damilare laughing. Mama Comfort looked at the boy. Then she looked at Adebayo. Her eyes narrowed. The smile was almost identical. From that day, she started watching. And she noticed other things. Adebayo always became uncomfortable when Bisi entered the church. He knew Damilare's name even though Bisi had never introduced them. And whenever Bisi needed help, somehow money disappeared from the church office. Mama Comfort said nothing. Not yet. Then one afternoon, she saw something that changed everything. She saw Adebayo secretly hand Bisi an envelope behind the church. Mama Comfort stood behind a wall and watched. Bisi shook her head. I don't want your money anymore. Adebayo's face tightened. Keep your voice down. My son is 6 years old, she replied. He asks me about you. Adebayo looked frightened. I told you never to speak about this. Bisi stared at him. Then she said quietly, I promised to protect your marriage. I never promised to protect your life forever. Mama Comfort's eyes widened. So it was true. Adebayo was Damilare's father. But Mama Comfort didn't expose him immediately. Instead, she confronted him privately the next morning. Pastor, Adebayo turned. Mama Comfort held his eyes. I know. His face changed. Know what? Don't insult me. She stepped closer. I know who Damilare's father is. Adebayo's mouth dried. Mama Comfort, please. You have until Sunday. His eyes widened. Until Sunday for what? To tell your wife the truth yourself. Adebayo begged her to remain silent. Mama Comfort shook her head. I might have stayed quiet if you had made your mistake and then tried to make things right. But you didn't. You abandoned the woman, hid the child, and then stood in this church preaching against women like Bisi. Adebayo's face hardened. I have changed. Mama Comfort looked at him sadly. No, you have only become better at hiding. She walked away. Adebayo stood there trembling. He had 3 days. He planned to confess, but fear was stronger than courage. Instead, he decided to protect his secret one more time. And that Sunday, he chose the worst possible moment. During the service, Bisi sat quietly near the back with Damilare. Pastor Adebayo stepped onto the pulpit. His eyes found Bisi. Then his voice became louder. Some people think they can live however they want and still come into God's house. Bisi's heart dropped. Damilare looked at her. Pastor Adebayo continued. There are women who bring children into this world without marriage and then expect everyone else to carry their shame. People began to whisper. Bisi lowered her head. Then from the back of the church, an old woman slowly stood. Enough! The church went silent. Adebayo stared at her. Mama Comfort, sit down. No. She walked slowly towards the front. You had your chance to tell the truth. Adebayo's face paled. Mama Comfort turned to the congregation. You have spent years calling this woman shameless. She pointed at Adebayo. But the man who knew the truth was standing here on this pulpit every Sunday. Adebayo shook his head. Don't do this. Mama Comfort reached into her bag and brought out an old envelope. Then explain this. She held it up. Bisi stared at it. Adebayo knew exactly what it was. The church fell silent. Mama Comfort continued. For years, money was secretly sent to Bisi, and this handwriting belongs to Pastor Adebayo. Adebayo stepped backward. That proves nothing. Then another voice came from behind him, his wife. Then I have a question. Everyone turned. Mama Folake stood near the church entrance. Her eyes were filled with tears. Adebayo, she said quietly. He couldn't look at her. How long? He remained silent. Folake's voice shook. How long have you been paying that woman? Bisi covered her mouth. Adebayo whispered, Folake, how long? Mama Comfort answered for him, 5 years. Folake's face collapsed. 5 years? She turned towards Bisi. For a moment, Bisi was terrified that Folake would hate her, but Folake simply looked at her with tears in her eyes.
Then she turned back to her husband. "You stood here and called her shameless." Adebayo started crying. Folake stepped closer. "You preached about morality while secretly paying the woman you had abandoned." "Folake, I was afraid." "No." Her voice suddenly became stronger. "You weren't afraid when you pointed at her." The church became completely silent. "You weren't afraid when you called her a disgrace." Adebayo lowered his head. Folake's voice broke. "You were only afraid of being discovered." Then a tiny voice came from beside Bisi. "Mama?" Bisi looked down. Damilare was staring at Adebayo. "Is he my daddy?" Bisi froze. The entire congregation seemed to stop breathing. Adebayo looked at the little boy. For 6 years, he had avoided that face. For 6 years, he had pretended that boy did not belong to him. But now, the truth was standing in front of him. He slowly nodded. "Yes." Damilare looked at Bisi. "Mama?" Bisi knelt beside him. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Yes, my son." She pointed toward Adebayo. "That is your father." Damilare stared at the man. Then he asked the question that broke Adebayo completely. "Why didn't you come for me?" Adebayo couldn't answer because there was no excuse that could make 6 years disappear. The church elders later demanded that Pastor Adebayo step down. He lost his position. His reputation collapsed. But the hardest part came afterward. Folake left the marriage, not because she wanted revenge. She simply needed peace. Before leaving, she told Adebayo, "I forgive you because I refuse to carry hatred for the rest of my life." Adebayo looked at her hopefully, but she continued, "Forgiveness does not mean I have to remain your wife." Then she walked away. Bisi also refused to accept money from Adebayo anymore. If you want to be Damilare's father, then be his father. Don't just send money. For the first time, Adebayo understood what he had done. Money had been easy. Fatherhood was different. So he began again. He visited Damilare. At first, the boy barely spoke to him. Adebayo brought books. Damilare accepted them but said nothing. He came again and again. One afternoon, Damilare was doing his homework when Adebayo sat beside him. "Can I help you?" The boy looked at him. Then he asked, "Are you going to leave again?" Adebayo's eyes filled with tears. "No." Damilare stared at him. "You said that before." Adebayo had no defense, so he simply sat there. "No more promises," he said quietly. "I'll show you." And for the first time, he understood that rebuilding trust would take much longer than hiding the truth had. Months later, Adebayo was no longer standing behind a pulpit. There were no crowds cheering for him. No one was calling him pastor with admiration. But one afternoon, he walked beside Damilare through the market. Damilare reached for his hand. Adebayo looked down. He couldn't believe it. The child he had once been afraid to claim was finally holding his hand in public. And this time, Adebayo didn't let go. The people of Ijebu-Ode never forgot what happened in that church. They learned that making a mistake does not make someone beyond forgiveness, but hiding behind righteousness while destroying someone else for the very thing you secretly did yourself is something much darker. Because sometimes the loudest person condemning another person's sin is simply trying to make sure nobody looks closely at his own. And Pastor Adebayo learned the hardest lesson of all. A secret can protect your reputation for a while, but sooner or later, truth will ask you to pay the price.